I was grabbing coffee with a friend the other day who's followed SpaceX since the early Falcon 1 days. He was scrolling through his phone, shaking his head at a clip of the Optimus robot. You know, the one where it looks a bit stiff and awkward, like it's learning to walk for the first time. "It's over," my friend said, sounding genuinely disappointed. He's spread too thin. Between the cars, the robots, and whatever is happening on X, he's forgotten about Mars. To him, and to most of the world, Musk's empire looks like a collection of increasingly loud distractions. We see a billionaire pivoting from rockets to social media feuds and clumsy robotics, and we assume the grand vision of a multiplanetary species has been buried under a mountain of side quests. It's a clean, logical narrative, the genius who lost his focus. But then I asked my friend a question. If you actually land on Mars tomorrow, how do you survive? You can't remote control a rover from Earth with a 20-minute signal delay. You can't spend your limited oxygen manually digging trenches or laying solar panels. Suddenly, that glitchy, self-driving software and those fragile robots start to look less like consumer toys and more like the essential operating system for a world where humans simply cannot perform the labor. The real surprise isn't that Musk is distracted. It's that we might be misidentifying which parts are the distractions. While the world cheers for the spectacular rocket launches, the most critical pieces of the Martian puzzle are being built in the wrong companies. And yet, there is one choice Musk made that genuinely threatens the entire mission. One single detour that provides zero technology for space and risks the institutional trust required to get there. To understand how humanity actually settles another planet, we have to stop looking at the fire and start looking at the side quests.
Yeah, I mean, that perspective, it just completely shifts how you have to look at this whole endeavor.
It really does, right?
Absolutely, because, you can't just see it as like a car company and a rocket company and an AI firm all doing their own separate isolated things.
Right, like they're totally unrelated.
Exactly. You really have to start seeing it as this highly synchronized preliminary infrastructure project.
Yeah. And, there was this one story I came across that it captured this perfectly for me.
Yeah. What was it?
So picture this late night trial down at a really isolated testing facility in South Texas.
Okay.
They brought in tons of artificial red dirt, right, just to simulate the Martian surface. And in the middle of this enormous quiet room, there was this prototype autonomous unit.
Ah, like a descendant of the Tesla bot.
Exactly. And its task was to assemble a modular solar array. And it was doing this in total silence. You can just see its spatial sensors glowing faintly red against all that dust.
Which is, exactly the environment it'll eventually operate in. No atmosphere, no sound.
Right. But the crazy part wasn't the assembly itself. At one point, the robot's mechanical arm caught on this thick, stray power cable.
Wow.
Yeah, and if you know anything about standard industrial robotics, you know exactly what usually happens next.
The machine just throws an error code, stops, and waits for a human to come fix it.
Right. But this unit didn't wait. It paused. Its internal processors calculated the tension and the angle of the snag, and then it deliberately and delicately manipulated its own wrist joint to untangle the cable.
Unbelievable.
And then it just seamlessly went back to the weld like nothing happened.
And that right there, that specific moment of untangling, that is the entire foundation of a multiplanetary settlement. It really can't be overstated how vital that independent decision-making process is.
Because there's nobody there to fix it.
Exactly. The big challenge of establishing a base on Mars is this concept called in-space assembly, or ISA. You see, heavy infrastructure, reinforced habitats, landing pads, they just cannot fit fully assembled into a single rocket fairing.
Because of the strict mass and volume limitations, right? Even with the largest rockets.
Yep.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. It's basically like dropping a family in an empty lot with just, raw timber and expecting them to build a house with absolutely no tools or contractors.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
Yeah.
The pieces of the Martian base have to be launched piecemeal, landed on the surface, and then aggregated. Yeah. And the crucial factor here is that you absolutely cannot rely on real-time teleoperation from Earth to do that assembly.
Because of the distance.
Right. Depending on where Earth and Mars are in their orbits, the communication delay is anywhere from roughly 4 to 24 minutes each way.
Wow. Up to 24 minutes.
Yeah. So if an operator on Earth sees that mechanical arm snag a cable, it takes up to 24 minutes for that video feed to even reach them, and another 24 minutes for their command to stop to get back to the robot.
By which point, the robot has completely torn the cable.
Exactly. It shorted the solar array and basically doomed the mission.
Wait, so if we know the communication delay makes remote control impossible, and we know the pieces have to be assembled on site, Why not just send human astronauts to do it? Why rely on the robots at all?
Because relying on humans for preliminary heavy civil engineering on Mars is just a guaranteed fatality.
Yeah.
Every mistake on that planet is an existential threat.
Right, because the environment is actively trying to kill you.
It is entirely hostile to biology. Yeah. You simply cannot have human astronauts burning their incredibly limited calories, risking micrometeorite punctures to their pressurized suits, and absorbing massive doses of cosmic radiation just to dig trenches.
Or bolt solar panels together.
Exactly. The preliminary infrastructure workforce has to be inorganic.
But I mean, I have to push back a bit here because we are talking about literal life or death stakes.
Sure.
Think about the devices you use every day, right? Like, I drive a car with advanced driver assistance software, and I trust my robot vacuum to navigate my living room, but they still make these bizarre, inexplicable errors right here on Earth. Like, my vacuum still gets stuck under the exact same couch every Tuesday, and if my vacuum gets stuck, whatever, my rug stays dirty. But if a robotic welder fails on Mars, the habitat depressurizes and people die. So how do we trust an algorithm with the survival of a human colony millions of miles away?
Well, that is a completely valid concern. And it goes right to the heart of why Tesla's full self-driving program is so deeply misunderstood by the public.
So,
what's fascinating here is that FSD is not just a consumer convenience feature for, highway commuting. In the context of Mars, the millions of cars running that software on chaotic Earth roads constitute the world's largest real-world laboratory for autonomous decision-making under absolute uncertainty.
Wait, so driving a car in California is directly training a robot on Mars?
Because the underlying neural network isn't strictly learning how to drive a car, it's learning how to interpret and resolve spatial anomalies in three-dimensional space in real time. When a car encounters, say, a pedestrian suddenly stepping out from between two parked vans, it has to instantly process that unexpected visual data. And it has to react without a pre-written line of code telling it what to do.
Right, because you can't program every possible scenario into the code.
And that is the exact same algorithmic architecture required to recognize a snag cable on a Martian solar array and figure out how to untangle it.
Wow.
The billions of miles driven on Earth are basically stress testing all these edge cases. So these Optimus robots are being forged in this massive data pool to tolerate harsh environments, to build and repair long before human lungs ever take a single breath on that planet.
Okay, so the machines are rational. They calculate tension, they resolve anomalies without any ego, and they cooperate silently. But to actually get those perfectly rational machines onto a launch pad, you have to navigate the most irrational, noisy, and fragile system on Earth, which is human institutional politics.
Absolutely. The institutional detour.
Yeah.
It is the one variable an algorithm just cannot untangle.
Right. And if the robots represent this seamless hardware of survival, the bureaucratic relationships required to fund them represent a massive bottleneck.
Sure.
Like, consider this recent high-stakes briefing that happened in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So it's a room full of aerospace, regulatory officials, government liaisons, private contractors, all meeting to finalize this joint orbital logistics project. The technical merits were sound. The engineering teams had completely done their jobs.
Everything was ready to go.
Exactly. Just as the government officials were preparing to officially sign off on the launch windows, a series of deeply polarizing political posts appeared on X directly from the top of the private aerospace company.
Wow. Talk about terrible timing.
Instantly, the atmosphere in that room just shifted. The conversation derailed completely from thrust capacities and payload logistics to pure frantic damage control.
Right. We are essentially seeing the immense speed of social media dictating the actual pace of physical space exploration.
It perfectly highlights the paradox of the modern space age, because that rugged individualism, that disruptor energy that cuts through red tape and gets rockets off the ground when traditional government programs get bogged down, it's the exact same energy that burns the bridges needed for long-term stability. A multi-planetary settlement requires decades of unwavering international and governmental partnerships. But this ultimate collective human endeavor is at risk of just getting lost in the noise of earthly culture wars.
And that friction is yielding highly tangible systemic consequences for the mission's timeline. I mean, the tension between Elon Musk and NASA is escalating publicly.
Yeah, we've all seen the headlines.
Recently, Musk engaged in a series of social media attacks directed at the acting head of NASA, Sean Duffy. He mockingly referred to the administrator as Sean Dummy. He specifically pointed to Duffy's past as a lumberjack sports champion, publicly questioning if someone whose biggest claim to fame is climbing trees was qualified to run America's space program.
But, I mean, this wasn't just random name-calling, right? This was a direct response to a massive financial pivot by the agency.
Duffy made the decision to reopen the bidding for the multi-billion-dollar Artemis moonlander contract. He allowed competitors like Blue Origin and Lockheed Martin to submit proposals.
And originally, SpaceX had secured that massive $4.4 billion contract for the Starship mega rocket for the moon.
Exactly. So the attack on Duffy was a reaction to a threatened monopoly. But the fallout from that reaction deeply destabilizes the entire foundation of trust between the private contractor and the government agency.
We have this visionary of pushing the absolute boundaries of physics and engineering. Is this combative, highly polarized persona simply an unavoidable trait of a mind that operates on that level? Or is it a fatal bug in the system?
Right.
Because if you alienate the primary customer, the United States government, you jeopardize the massive funding and regulatory approvals required to ever physically reach Mars.
This raises an important question regarding the tension between the necessary speed of private innovation and the absolute requirement of stable governmental oversight. I mean, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson has previously had to express his concerns directly to SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell about where the company's focus actually lies. And market research tracking net favorability, which is the percentage of people with a positive view of a company minus those with a negative view, shows SpaceX's favorability dropping significantly right in tandem with these public feuds.
Because the polarization from the social media platform inevitably spills over onto the aerospace company.
Exactly. Now, for a standard consumer brand, political polarization might just, shift your target demographic. But SpaceX does not sell products to the general public.
Right, we aren't buying rockets at the store.
Their largest, most vital customers are NASA and the Department of Defense. And those entities rely on rigorous, stable, and highly predictable procurement processes. So while Tesla and SpaceX are undeniably engineering the critical physical infrastructure for Mars, the acquisition and management of X absorbs an extraordinary amount of executive attention.
While producing zero transferable technology for space settlement.
None at all.
Yeah.
And it severely complicates the regulatory alignment needed to actually launch the rockets.
We're effectively exporting Earth's political tribalism to orbit before we even leave the atmosphere.
It's a sobering thought.
But okay, let's assume for a moment that we navigate that minefield. Let's assume the bureaucracy holds together, the government funds the rockets, and the autonomous robots successfully build a flawless habitat on the Martian surface.
Scenario.
We eventually put human beings inside it. Well, at that exact moment, the political and engineering challenges sort of vanish, and they are replaced by a purely biological one. Because even with perfect hardware, the human mind remains the most fragile, unpredictable component of the entire mission.
We essentially transition from the hardware of survival to the software of survival, human psychology.
Put yourself in that habitat for a second. Try to imagine being one of the first 50 residents of a Martian colony. You're living in what is essentially a highly advanced, pressurized tin can.
Not a lot of elbow room.
I was reading this psychological profile derived from a long-duration isolation study, and it focused heavily on a concept called sensory poverty. Yeah. After 6 months in this sealed environment, without the wind, without the sun, without any novel stimuli at all, the sound of a teammate's chewing or the specific repetitive ways someone cleared their throat stopped being just a minor annoyance.
It became something worse.
It became a source of genuine, violent resentment. In that cramped space, there is no away. You cannot leave.
You can't just take a walk around the block to cool off. The physical environment literally traps the psychological distress.
It does, and it forces you to realize that the greatest immediate threat to a Mars colony isn't a catastrophic radiation leak or a failure of the life support systems. It is the degradation of the human social fabric.
Right.
We spend billions of dollars obsessing over the hardware, the thrust capacity of the starships, the torque of the robotic arms, while completely neglecting the software of human empathy and emotional regulation. If we do not solve the problem of how to live together in a vacuum, we are just exporting earthly traumas to a new world.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of biobehavioral stress, the data analyzing these exact conditions is incredibly stark. Researchers conducted in-depth observations of 18 individuals across 3 separate simulated Mars missions at the SIC's habitat in Hawaii.
Oh, the dome on the volcano.
Exactly. These were long-duration, 8 to 12-month missions, completely isolated, with that 20-minute communication delay artificially enforced to really mimic the reality of Mars.
Right.
And what they documented was not just a slow, steady decline in morale, but a very specific biological progression of psychosocial stress through 4 distinct phases.
Wait, so the human brain breaks down in predictable stages under isolation?
Phase 1 is characterized by the eustress of initial adaptation. During the first few months, the crew's stress hormones, like cortisol, are actually elevated, but it functions as a performance-enhancing stress.
Like a honeymoon phase. We've got this.
Exactly. The collective mindset is highly motivated, they strictly follow their fitness routines, and cooperation is super high. But then the environment takes its toll, leading to phase 2, deprivation due to prolonged isolation.
And that's where the sensory poverty kicks in.
It begins to physically alter their neurochemistry. Biological markers like dopamine and serotonin actually begin to decrease because the brain is literally scarves of novel inputs.
Interesting. You are taking these chemically altered, sensory deprived brains, and you are trapping them in a pressure cooker where the safety valve is permanently welded shut.
Which triggers phase 3,
Oh.
disruption of team dynamics. And the data shows this almost universally hits right around the 6-month mark. It is a literal psychological rupture point.
Ow. 6 months in.
Physical activity drops significantly. But much more alarmingly, oxidative damage in their bodies rapidly increases. The chronic elevated stress literally causes physiological wear and tear at the cellular level, damaging areas of the brain responsible for emotional regulation.
Man, so this is the biological mechanism behind why someone clearing their throat suddenly triggers a rage response.
Exactly. The brain can no longer inhibit its own frustration. And if that isn't mitigated, you hit phase 4. Asynchronous coping.
How does a crew member cope asynchronously in a confined space where you are always on top of each other?
They start weaponizing time.
Weaponizing time. What does that mean?
Crew members will deliberately alter their own sleep schedules, waking up at 3 in the morning or staying awake long into the night just to avoid interacting with the rest of the team. They will willingly sacrifice their own vital circadian rhythms and endure severe sleep deprivation just to buy a few hours of absolute solitude.
But I mean, I have to push back on our fundamental ability to truly study and prepare for this phenomenon.
Oh, so?
You can run all the simulated missions you want in a dome in Hawaii, but every single person inside that dome knows deep down in their primitive brain that if someone has a heart attack or if the habitat catches fire, they can just open the airlock, step outside, and breathe the air.
Right. Rescue's an option.
Absolutely. Rescue is always an option on Earth. So how can any amount of training on Earth truly prepare a human mind for the absolute impossibility of rescue? The crushing knowledge that you are entirely existentially alone.
That is the defining hurdle of human spaceflight. And aerospace psychologists openly acknowledge that a dome on a volcano just isn't enough to prepare a crew.
So researchers are pivoting to frameworks like the Extended Feature Classification System of Analogs, or EFCSA.
EFCSA, okay.
They argue that we need to stop using basic isolation chambers and start utilizing peak fidelity analogs.
What does a peak fidelity analog look like if not a simulated habitat?
It looks like submerged cave system exploration, or deep polar overwintering in the Antarctic.
Wow.
These are environments where field experts face genuine, immediate, and lethal operational hazards. If you are a mile deep in a submerged pitch-black cave system and you panic, you drown.
Yeah, there's no opening the door.
There's no calling for help. The environment forces a state of extreme psychological flow, requiring what psychologists call a functional contextual behavior. The astronaut's internal emotional state must perfectly match the unforgiving reality of their environment. It's like having to completely rewire the brain's panic response to act like an industrial circuit breaker. A breaker that simply refuses to trip no matter how massive the surge in emotional current, because tripping the breaker means death.
Exactly, because on Mars, a maladaptive coping strategy isn't just an interpersonal conflict. If an astronaut decides to isolate themselves and refuses to speak to the engineer who maintains the oxygen scrubber simply because they chew their food too loudly, that breakdown in communication will rapidly cascade into a fatal operational error.
It all comes back to this massive, fragile web of systems integration. Every single component must communicate flawlessly. The algorithms have to untangle the physical cables. The government agencies must navigate the political noise to trust the private contractor. And the human beings must master their own degrading neurochemistry just to survive breakfast with their crewmates.
It is the ultimate test of integration. The raw transportation, the rockets, they can get us there. The autonomous robotics provide the essential operating system for survival, performing the exhaustive labor that human biology just cannot withstand.
But the entire mission, this grand vision of a multiplanetary future, is currently bottlenecked by two massive blind spots. First, the completely non-transferable distraction of social media culture wars that rapidly erode the institutional trust required to fund and authorize the launches. And second, a severe underestimation of the biological and psychological toll that extreme, inescapable isolation inflicts on the human mind. Humanity's greatest hurdle in becoming a multiplanetary species isn't mastering the unforgiving vacuum of space or engineering rockets with enough thrust to defy gravity. It is confronting our own psychological fragility. And the ultimate irony is that if we do manage to forge a human mind capable of surviving the absolute isolation and sensory poverty of Mars, we will have created a psychology so fundamentally altered that those colonists will eventually cease to be compatible with the world they left behind, ensuring the first successful Martian settlement won't just be an extension of Earth, but the deliberate beginning of a completely separate human species.